Hello there. Sometimes in the vast deep darkness of space, you encounter something you've not seen before, something that shakes you to your soul, something so powerful. Someone built something so destructive, so powerful, so dangerous that you really just want to run and hide. And we've seen examples of this, a Borg cube, the Scimitar, a Dominion battleship even. But for a little ship that could, like the USS Helios, to encounter such a heavily armed warship, well, shat yourself must have been really the way to go, right? That is the Shrike. We're here today to discuss this spiky, aggressive, unusual, unorthodox, unknown starship encountered in 2401 pursuing the USS Helios. Before we get started, however, talking about this, like, share and subscribe, comment down below, tell me what you thought of Star Trek Picard Season 3 and just about this vessel in general and your theories on its origins, because I'm going to tell you up front, there isn't much, but we're going to discuss the different theories and speculations about this ship right here. So let's get started. As I said, this vessel was encountered in 2401. It was pursuing the SS Helios, should I say, a civilian-owned medical support craft of some description, controlled at the time by Dr. Beverly Crusher and her son, Jack Crusher. The vessel was no match for the Shrike, of course, neither was a Starfleet vessel such as the USS Titan A, but didn't stop them trying. The Shrike was an enormously powerful, large, heavily armed warship caliber vessel, the likes of which was very rarely encountered by Starfleet. Usually a ship like this, when encountered, has usually been a custom build. It's kind of the high-end sportster of the warship world, generally speaking, with very few vessels coming close to really its capabilities. The ship was 659 meters in length and was incredibly heavily armed for a ship of its time, or really from any time. Its armament was identified to include 40 isolytic burst warheads, 88 plasma torpedoes, 236 photon torpedoes, 18 antimatter missiles, 20 pulse wave torpedoes and directed energy weapons, as well as a Starfleet Federation produced weaponized portal technology, which wasn't specifically a weapon but was utilized by the Shrike in such capacity. It's not known exactly how many torpedo launchers it had, I should point out. That's simply the stats of how many of the weapons it actually carried on board. The vessel was commanded by Vadic, who was a changeling, as well as other changelings on board. Now, in terms of general appearance, it follows the general idea that pointy is bad. Most angular, pointy, spiky ships like this tend to be built by the bad guys. And that's because that design lends itself naturally to not only visually be more intimidating, but also it allows the positioning of weapons to be forward-facing and all-encompassing, to basically allow you to blitz an enemy in front of you. Having a more universal firing starship like a Federation ship is, yes, it can be heavily armed, but it's not concentrated. It's more geared toward, yeah, it's heavily armed, but it's defensive because it can fire everywhere. It's more like a screen. This ship had the ability to concentrate all of its weapons in one location. It had basically 4 pontoon-like spikes, which protruded from the sides of the ship going forward, and the back of which were the engines. Below the central body of the ship, which was rather insect-like in appearance, was a deflector array / tractor beam. The tractor beam in and of itself was also interesting and was a new generation of tractor beam technology which had the ability to lock onto an object and throw it, also working as a repulsor wave technology. Quite fascinating, but not necessarily its most powerful weapon, but certainly one of its more interesting. The Shrike was also equipped with some kind of stealth technology, as well as transporters and other basic systems that you would expect of a 25th century vessel. Early reports of a vessel like this, which flew no flag, and basically this whole profile had been reported by the Fenris Rangers in the preceding months and years before these events, but little to nothing had come of those reports, some believing it to be just a ghost ship, a mirage, a myth, didn't really exist. Now to get to a few of the speculations. Where exactly does this ship come from? Now we know that it's controlled by changelings. Changelings, of course, are Dominion personnel. But is this ship actually a Dominion? We'll go over that. Let's look at it. The changelings specifically that controlled this vessel were mutant changelings. They had half the life of a normal changeling, but had superior shape-shifting abilities in that they could more accurately mimic another being. I don't think they actually had the same range of shape-shifting abilities. I think they were a little bit more locked. We know that changelings could, for example, morph into space-dwelling life forms as well as energy and gas, whereas these changelings seem to only be stuck. For example, when Vadik was blown out into space, she didn't live. She should have just been able to shapeshift into a space-dwelling life form and been fine. That's not what happened. They seem to shapeshift a little slower than a normal changeling and seem to be a little more, as I say, set in their form. So there is an upside and a downside. On the one hand, they make a more convincing human, say, but the downside is they can't really make much else. But nonetheless, mutant or not, genetically mutated, I should point out, they were still changelings. Those experiments on them, which mutated them, were done by Federation scientists who worked for Section 31. And the result was, of course, them. So that brings us to theory number one. My own theory, which I originally posited at the beginning of Star Trek Picard, which I'll be honest got completely blown out of the water, many of my early theories did, was that this ship was actually a Section 31 vessel or possibly a modified Section 31 ship. We've seen something similar before. But I'm going to circle back to this, but it obviously doesn't seem to have been, at least doesn't now seem to have been a Section 31 craft, but it is one possibility. It could have been a Section 31 ship that Vadik and the other changelings stole. Second, and probably the most obvious and probably even most likely, is that it's simply a Dominion ship. It does have something of an insect-like appearance. If you were to stick the body of a beetle on the back of it, you've got one of those like armoured beetles, you know, with the big jaws. You've kind of got one of them. And Dominion ships are often quite beetle-like. The sort of bug ships, for example. That's a possibility. The central part of the vessel was a bit more insect-like in appearance, with almost mandible-like front sections as well as what looked like almost like pincers around it. It looked like a mouthpiece, basically. It's possible. But the addition of that deflector dish / tractor beam array area does make it seem kind of Federation-y looking to me. But it's obviously most likely that it's simply a Dominion ship. Another option is actually the vessel was constructed by the Borg. I don't think the Borg had the resources, personally. I kind of throw that theory out, but it is a possibility. It could be a Borg ship, or at least a vessel the Borg built for their needs. Next option is it's a one-of-a-kind custom-built ship built by some other party, maybe the Romulans or somebody else, because it is possible it was Romulan built. It's conceivable. It does have certain similarities, but, and I've read speculations about that. Personally, I don't buy it. I think that one is the least likely. Maybe even more so than it's simply being built out of spare parts the Borg had lying around. Or it's something the Borg captured and gave to them that actually comes in the Delta Quadrant or something. Those are all possibilities. My most, I think, coherent theory on what the Shrike, who built the Shrike, I think it was a custom build. I think it was probably built in the Alpha Quadrant. It didn't come from the Gamma Quadrant. So that means it probably wasn't built directly by the Dominion. I think it was most likely built within Federation borders by the changelings who were working within the Federation. Was it a Federation ship? No. Is it a Federation ship that we have that humanity and Starfleet and the Federation have designs for? No. It uses elements of their technology, maybe even elements of Borg technology who they were working with. It uses mostly Dominion and Federation tech, which might explain the sort of fusion-y design it's got going. Built at a secret shipyard somewhere, maybe utilised by Section 31, or some other covert branch within the Federation, or maybe at shipyards of the Andorian shipyards or somebody like that. But this thing was built secretly and quietly somewhere. Either that or the changelings did build it themselves at a secret facility somewhere in the Alpha Quadrant. I can't see them sneaking this thing through the Bajoran wormhole from the Gamma Quadrant. It is possible. It could even have been something that was built during the Dominion War. But considering the types of weapons it carried, the kind of capabilities it had, I think if the Dominion had this during the war, they would have used it. So I think it's a custom build. Considering its compatibility with Federation tech, such as the portal weapon, I think that it's more than likely a custom build of hybridization of technologies of different origins. Maybe a bit of Borg, bit of Federation, bit of Dominion, bit of whatever else. Probably mostly Dominion and Federation technology kind of fused together to make it. That seems to me to be the most likely, but what do you guys think? Who built the Shrike? Where was it built? Am I completely off again? Because my theory last time was way out there and wrong. It was not a Section 31 ship, and I accept that. It is a possibility. It is conceivable. This is simply a Section 31 ship repurposed and modified by the Changelings. Because bear in mind, they did escape from a Changeling facility, a Section 31 facility at some point. They could have just stole the ship along the way. I think, though, personally, it's more likely it was built for them by conspirators and Changelings, somebody secretly building the thing in pieces, bringing it all together, assembling it, and then running off with it. It's also, again, possible some third party somewhere out in deep space, like I say, the Romulans, the Orions, the Packlids, someone was used to build this thing. Almost certainly the Changelings designed it. I think that's pretty much a given. I don't think this is definitely not a Federation design. It doesn't conform to any starship hull geometry used by any member state of the Federation. It has more in common with Dominion ships, but some of its base technology and some of the systems do seem to have a Federation-esque aesthetic. Now, the control panels, some would argue, and I think this does provide evidence and support for the theory that this ship is actually Dominion in origin, and all the control panels are in Dominion. The kind of way they look is Dominion styling, and the writing on them is Dominion. That makes sense because the Changelings are the Dominion. The written language and control panels used by the Dominion ships is not Jem'Hadar, it's Changeling. So that would be no different than, say, if Starfleet captured a Kazon vessel, they might upload their own panels to the screens because they're alphanumeric, they just change. It's conceivable you'd simply change them. Now, yeah, they didn't do that on DS9, but they did in some areas, like sickbay, stuff like that. They simply modified the panels to appear more Federation-like. This ship was built for Changelings, if not by them. So, yes, it would have Dominion writing on it, Dominion programming. But, again, what does everybody think? What's your theory on the origins of the ship? Who built it? Where was it built? Was it built in the Gabble Quadrant sent through? Was it built by conspirators on this side? Was it built in secret at a third-party location? Is it of some other origin and that's not been presented here? Because these are all the theories I found on, to be honest, on Reddit, on even a bit on Memory Alpha, sort of explaining where this thing came from, which there isn't much on there. Bottom line, there's no in-universe direct explanation as to the origins of the Shrike. It could simply be a heavily modified assault vessel built by some other race at some point. Now, just to side address, and this is a bit of an appendix, there is a beta canon, somewhat, kind of explanation for this vessel, which sort of makes no sense for the main continuity for Alpha Canon. As I've said before, I tend to stick to Alpha Canon, and this, because this video is a bit of speculation, a bit of friendly, like, where the fuck does this ship come from? Let's go into a little beta canon, and that is some Star Trek Online, and it's kind of an aside, because it's not directly about this ship, but it could lead to a potential explanation. In Star Trek Online, there's an alien species called the Elachi. The Elachi are seen in canon in an episode of Star Trek Enterprise, Silent Enemy. They board the ship, they don't talk, they're big kind of gangly weird aliens who carry some kind of personal shields that are immune to our weapons. They board the ship and experiment on the crew, keep running away. They attack the Enterprise, but are driven off when the Enterprise overloads its phases and makes the ship retreat. Now, in canon, and it is canon, whether people want to like this answer or not, they are called the Kovalians, and we actually encounter them again in The Expanse. That's been confirmed by writers. It could easily be retconned out of canon, in fairness, because it's never clearly stipulated on screen, but that was always the intention, or that has been described as the intention. But in Star Trek Online, they are called the Elachi, and they sort of exist in the mycelial network, and they're not the friendliest bunch, and they work with the Iconians. Now, the other ships that were working with the Shrike, which are clearly not Jem'Hadar attack ships, those vessels were actually lifted directly from Star Trek Online, and those are Elachi vessels, which could indicate that this ship is actually Elachi. Now, feeding into my own original theory that I actually posited the similarities in basic hull geometry between this vessel and another alien ship we encountered in Enterprise around the same time period, a pirate ship that would have murdered the crew of an Axanar vessel. Its similar hull profile could mean that they're from the same race. Now, if these ships are meant to be Ilachi, as in the original Silent Enemy, it could be all these are connected and could be all the same race. That pirate ship, these raiders, the Shrike, they all come from the same people. They're the same race. They are the Ilachi or the Kovalians, whatever you want to call them. It's possible. I don't think that's what they were going for. I think that they just used an existing asset they already had under their licensing and they simply adapted it to the screen. I don't think it's meant to imply that these ships are actually Ilachi or that some of the events from Star Trek Online are going to find their way more into canon. But Season 3 of Star Trek Picard did use a lot of Star Trek Online assets, the Odyssey class, for example. But that, just because they've lifted the classes and the designs, doesn't mean that everything in Star Trek Online about those ships is also true about them now in canon. In other words, just because these ships are Ilachi in Star Trek Online doesn't mean that they're not, say, Orion or some other alien race in this. It's just that they've used that design element. And it's the same for the Odyssey class, the Enterprise F. Just because the Enterprise F had Slipstream and all the other abilities on Star Trek Online doesn't mean it does have in Alpha Canon now in the early 25th century. I mean, maybe, but Alpha Canon is if we've seen it, or they've stated in dialogue, or displayed it on a screen somewhere, in the actual show or in one of the movies, that makes it Alpha Canon. If it's not in that specific area, if it's not in it or it's in it adjacent, it's not Alpha Canon. It's Beta Canon. I mean, me saying that the Kovalians, for example, is borderline Beta Canon, but because it was the intention of the writers and has been announced in interviews and stuff, you can take it until it's said otherwise that is the case. But that was a little bit of an aside, going on for a little longer than I wanted it to, but that's an aside. It could indicate that this ship is Ilachi, perhaps. But again, just an aside. We're now at the end of this episode. Like, share and subscribe. Comment down below, hit the bell notification icon, because that's the real subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with all the episodes from this channel. And with that out of the way, we're now done. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye. I'd just like to say a thank you to everyone for watching that video. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoy making these. If you did enjoy it, please consider giving a like, share, and a subscribe, and maybe checking out the other videos on the screen right now, and in the description box below there are links to my other social media accounts.